Our gospel lesson is from Luke chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. And I invite you, as you're able, let us honor the reading of the gospel as we stand together. Once, while Jesus was standing beside the lake of Gennesaret, and the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he saw two boats there at the shore of the lake. The fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. Jesus got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little way from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the crowds from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we have worked all night long but have caught nothing. Yet, if you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done this, they caught so many fish that their nets were beginning to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so that they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." For he and all who were with him were amazed at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching people." When they had brought their boats to shore, they left everything and followed him. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. This morning, one of the themes of our message is the theme of letting go. We haven't done this for a while. For those of you who may be new to our community, sometimes I will throw out a question for you all to discuss, maybe with the person sitting next to you, if you want to get in maybe groups of 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever. So I want to invite you to do this and discuss this question as you feel comfortable. In this season of your life right now, what is one thing you need to let go of? In this season of your life right now, what is one thing you need to let go of? It can be maybe something seemingly trivial. Maybe it could be that old ratty sitting chair I've been promising that I'm going to get rid of. I need to let go of that. Maybe it could be, maybe you're let go of a frustration that's been nagging at you. Whatever you feel comfortable sharing with each other, I invite you to share now. In this season of your life, what is one thing you are in need of letting go of? So you have 90 seconds, and oops, where's my phone? I will count it. I'll let you know. 90 seconds. Go. Okay, let's come back together. And I invite you, if you'd like to just share from your own personal perspective, what is one thing you need to let go of? Someone in the previous service named what I was thinking of, just the need to let go of the idea or the desire to control things that are out of my control and just control what I can control. Certainly that is something we could all benefit from. What are some things that you need to let go of? Sentimentality over stuff. Okay. Yes.
Ditto.
Yes.
Finishing other people's thoughts for them.
Finishing other people's thoughts for them. Yes.
I think things that happen in your past that hurt you, to just forgive that person and let it go.
Yeah. Yep. Letting go of old hurts. Something that we certainly all can relate to. Yeah, thank you all for sharing this things that we can all let go of for our own benefit as well as for our neighbor. We're going to be talking about letting go of stuff. One of the fastest growing industries in our nation is the self-storage industry. Whoops, what's that? You're finishing my sentence, aren't you? There we go. See. Yes. The self-storage industry is one of the fastest growing industries in our nation. It's at estimated about $44 billion a year and employs over 170,000 people. One statistic says that about 35 million people in the United States rent storage space. Currently, there are just over 52,300 storage units in the United States, and that's more facilities than the number of Starbucks and McDonald's locations combined. Usually we see an abundance of material things as a kind of blessing, and certainly there are some scriptures in the Bible that indicate that God sometimes blesses people, God's people, with material things. But for many people, this has become a curse, because we have stuff that we don't use, that we refuse to either sell or donate or get rid of, but we pay good money for it to sit in a 12 by 12 space. There's something within the human condition that prefers a clenched fist to hang on to our stuff rather than an open hand that ceases from trying to make a life by grasping, but is open to receiving life as a gift. How many of us grew up hearing well-intentioned adults give this advice? Life isn't going to hand you anything. You've got to go out there and grab it, take it, hold on to it. There's something within us that prefers grasping, holding on to. We prefer a clenched fist to an open hand. We prefer a clenched heart that hangs on to Sunday school certainties rather than having an open heart that is open to seeing the new thing of God that is before us. In other words, sometimes we are afraid of emptying ourselves of the things that define us. We cling to assumptions or even fears about others as a way to define ourselves. We cling to the ways that we experience God. I want to suggest that both of our scripture lessons this morning are about how the good news begins with empty things. In our first lesson, it's a story about a young man who's probably around college age, who went to temple to pray one day, and something happened. It started out in the usual way that these services start. He walked in, the usher greeted him with a smile, handed him a bulletin, and he sat down in his usual spot, fourth row on the left aisle. And he looked through the bulletin, and it was the same order, and he recognized some of the songs, one of them his favorite, and some of the songs he didn't recognize. And after the obligatory announcements, worship began. And at some point in the service, he couldn't remember, was it after the opening prayer or during the sermon? Was it during one of the songs? He wasn't sure, but at some point in the service, the glory of God appeared. The glory of God just erupted. And it was not a pleasant experience. It was as if the roof of the temple were being torn off and the hosts of heaven were streaming into the sanctuary. Clearly, this was not your typical Methodist service. And these angelic beings were not the cute, cuddly, little baby cherubs with wings that we see in Hallmark cards or in the old Precious Moments figurines. No, Isaiah says these were seraphs. These were serpents with wings who struck terror into your heart. This was not a calm, soothing event. This was a magnitude 8.5 earthquake. The ground was shaking with the glory of God. And Isaiah is terrified, so scared that he cries out, "Woe is me, for I'm a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips." As soon as God shows up, Isaiah is emptied of any religious pretense he has about himself. And his first response to God's holiness was to note his own unworthiness. And yet, despite this, Isaiah receives a call from God. God is looking for a messenger. Whom shall I send? And Isaiah steps up to the plate. Here I am, Lord, send me. God calls, and Isaiah answers. But that's not the end of the story. The rest of the story is the part we didn't read, in which God tells Isaiah that he will be sent to proclaim a message, to preach to the people, and they will listen, but they will not understand. They will see, but they will not recognize. In other words, what God is telling Isaiah is that because of the people's hardness of heart, his preaching will fall on deaf ears and clenched hearts and clenched fists. God is not telling Isaiah what to preach. Rather, he's preparing Isaiah for the result of his preaching. And God tells Isaiah up front, the result of his preaching is going to be failure. And Isaiah asks, well, Lord, for how long am I to do this? And God answers, until the land is desolate. Preach everything down to a stump until there is no hope. Preach until everything is empty. Someone once said that sometimes people must come to the end of themselves before they find God. Now, this word of judgment is a temporary word, and it results in things getting cleared out. Kind of like one of those controlled burns that forest officials will allow. They go into forests and they intentionally burn parts of a forest to burn away the dead branches and the undergrowth. They do this to allow for new growth, new life. So too, the word Isaiah is called to preach is a word that burns away, that empties out, that burns it all down to a stump until everything is empty. And it seems that when things are empty, when all hope is gone, when everything is forsaken, when there's no life, that's when God shows up. God seems to do his best work when things are empty. In the gospel lesson, there are a couple of empty things that are used as vessels of abundance. Luke says that Jesus is in the backwater region of Capernaum, and he comes across some fishermen who apparently can't fish. They're standing by the seashore cleaning their nets after a failed fishing expedition. And Luke says the crowds were so huge, so eager to hear and see Jesus, there was hardly any room for him to preach. Jesus sees Simon's boat, and it is empty. So he climbs in and asks Simon to take him out on the lake. Actually doesn't really ask. I love how Jesus just commandeers, gets in the boat and says, hey, Simon, get in. We're going out. Paddle me out. And they go a few feet out on the water. Simon's empty boat was a vessel for carrying the word. And when he finishes teaching and preaching, Jesus then tells the fishermen to let down their nets for a catch. Now, that's a pretty arrogant thing for a carpenter, to tell fishermen how to fish. Jesus may be good with hammers and saws and planing a nice piece of cedar, but he obviously doesn't have a clue about fishing. You don't go cast net fishing in the day. You're supposed to be doing that at night. That's why they were coming in after a night of failed fishing. Here these men have just docked their boats and from all the fishing and not one thing to show for it. And Jesus orders them to go back out. Simon informs Jesus, look, Master, we've worked all night and have caught nothing. Thus, Simon became the first person in the church to respond to an idea with, we've already tried that, didn't work. Perhaps out of desperation, or maybe even to prove Jesus' plan would fail, Simon agrees. He went back out fishing, perhaps planning to fail. But he didn't. It was quite a catch. Luke says they caught so many fish, the nets began to break, and even some of the boats began to sink. Now, you would think that seeing this and being a part of this, Simon would be jubilant, he would be excited, you would think he would be grateful. But Simon expresses none of that. Instead, he says, "Lord, go away from me, for I am a sinful man." Notice that Jesus calls the disciples in the midst of their failure. They've been at it all night. These were professional fishermen carrying on the family business. This was their livelihood. Here they are docking their boats with nothing to show for their all-night fishing attempts except for maybe some cigarette butts and beer cans that are empty and half-eaten moon pies. Their boats are empty. Their nets are empty. Their hopes for supporting their families are empty. Jesus showed up in the disciples' lives when things were empty. And the record of the gospel shows us clearly that Jesus did not choose the brightest people to follow him. Jesus did not choose the most affluent, the people with the most resources. No, he came to people who had very little to show for their own efforts. Life with Jesus began when the disciples offered him their failure, offered him their emptiness, their empty boats, their empty nets. Years ago, there was a popular show on Netflix called Tidying Up with Marie Kondo, based on her best-selling book. The show followed Marie Kondo as she helped people clear out the clutter from their homes and from their lives by getting rid of all the excess stuff that keeps them from experiencing real, deep joy. One of the things that she suggested was that no one should keep in their home more than 30 books. That is blasphemous to Duke Divinity grads. Each episode shows the emotional toll that each client feels as they determine whether to throw something out and what to throw out after a lifetime of accumulating all this stuff in their life journey. What makes Marie Kondo's method a bit terrifying is also what makes it so compelling. There is this kind of emotional and spiritual connection between our external clutter, our external stuff, and our internal life. Or as someone else has said, there is a connection between our shelves and ourselves. And yet, the greatest spiritual growth people make is when they are willing and ready to let go of something, to let go of things, whether it be some material things or emotional things that can keep us from experiencing true joy. Old hurts, old angers, old prejudices. These things can be a lot harder to let go of and throw away than a 50-pound Bible commentary in my office. Father Richard Rohr says, "This is when we must ask the hard questions. What am I afraid of? And is it worth holding on to? Grace will lead us into such fears," he writes, "and grace alone can fill them up if we're willing to stay in the void." When it comes to letting go of things we need to let go of in our lives, remember those questions. What am I afraid of? And is it worth holding on to? Letting go, forgiving, emptying ourselves takes a lot of courage and practice. And so we start with the small things. Maybe today we give up a trinket or maybe a couple of books. Maybe tomorrow we try buying just a little bit less. Maybe we try closing our laptops, putting down our phones, or for heaven's sake, turning off the corporate-owned cable news. And then we look at the empty space that's been created when we shut these things down, when we let go of them. The empty space created by our screens or our carts, the empty space on our shelves. And then we practice entering into the emptiness just to see what God can do. Because there is no life that is so empty, no exile that is so long, no boat that is so rickety, and no net that is so ratty and frayed that God cannot fill it beyond our imagining. Remember how at the beginning of the story the disciples were clinging to their nets, their empty nets, washing them, perhaps mending them. These nets, these boats, they were their livelihood. But at the end of the story, Luke tells us something significant. He says, and after they had docked everything, they left everything behind to follow Christ. They walked into this new life, new rhythm, learning that the fullness that they want can only be received by emptying their boats, emptying their nets, their hands, emptying their expectations. Only empty hands are able to receive a gift. This morning, two people encounter a holy God. One who walked into temple and thought it was going to be just worship as usual. The other who was just minding his own business, mending and cleaning his nets. Two people felt such awe and splendor at being in the presence of God that the first thing that came to mind was not, boy, the preacher was on fire this morning. It was not, boy, the music was inspiring. It was not, isn't church great? But rather, the first thing that came to mind, the first thing that they uttered was, woe is me. Depart from me. Lord, go away from me, for I am sinful. Isn't it interesting? That's our first inclination when we encounter God, is we don't want to be in the presence of God. And we ask God to leave us alone. But here's the incredible good news. God never departs. God never leaves. God just keeps showing up, reaching out, and coming to us and inviting us. In reply to our request for the Lord to depart from us, leave us, Jesus says to us, follow me. Try as you might, you just can't get rid of this God. It turns out He's in it for the long haul, and He's in it for you and for me. Thanks be to God. Amen.